Wah, wah,
Wah,
wah.
wah, wah. But we can talk about Rob Manfred, I believe, and we can probably talk about Ken Rosenthal, who was let go from the MLB Network. And I think that that's a really good place to start this podcast because we've talked about our veterans, right? After every podcast, like the freedoms that we have in America. I've been listening to some, please don't shoot me, but I've been listening to some podcasts that I trust about vaccination status and all that. And one of the guys I was listening to got kicked off Twitter. And it's kind of like, you know what? He may have a different opinion and maybe what he's saying isn't even correct, but you can't kick him off Twitter. Like, it doesn't make sense. And the Ken Rosenthal thing falls into that category for me. And so, Blum, I'm going to, like I said, that's the disclaimer. I know we're not allowed to talk about contracts and MLB and the Players Association and how that's going. But let's dig in a little bit to Ken Rosenthal and what we know about freedom of speech in America. How about that?
Oh man. Well, hopefully, your Twitter idea kind of runs against the idea of freedom of speech because it's a freedom of ideas, it's exchanging of ideas, and isn't it up to the person to decipher what's real, what's not, what they can take in and what they shouldn't take in?
Yeah.
That's a whole nother animal for a whole lot of other podcasts other than ours trying to get into that political Twitter fight realm. But as far as baseball is concerned, and I think it does kind of run into that idea of what is the freedom of speech in baseball. And I didn't know this until Ken Rosenthal got fired, that you actually have to be careful what you say. And the interesting thing about Ken Rosenthal is, and I don't think I'm going to shock anybody, especially in the Astro realm of things, is that Ken Rosenthal, for me personally, I have never had a bad interaction with him. I've disagreed on ideas. I've disagreed with articles he's written, and so is my dog.
Your dog hates Ken Rosenthal too. No. I know you're going to jump back. I know you're going to jump back in, but what I was going to say about that is that's the crux of this issue. Like you said, you're allowed to have discourse. You do not have to agree with everything that Ken Rosenthal has ever said, and I know that's where you're headed.
Yeah, and that's part of the discussion. And I've actually had conversations where I've run into Ken. Funny enough, I was actually in Boston, and we walked back to the hotel together and had a great conversation where I had the conversation where I said, this, that, and, this is how I feel. Why'd you write that? He explained his side, which is great because it helps me understand where he's coming from a little bit more. And knowing that he was a writer for Major League Baseball, he was a commentator on the MLB network. So I knew his bias was a little more towards the ownership side, towards Major League Baseball side, not anti-player, but it definitely had a tinge of, I'm on what side he was on. That's why I was kind of flabbergasted and shocked that he got actually fired, or not. He didn't get fired. He did not get renewed by Major League Baseball. And a lot of the idea was because he had some harsh criticism of Rob Manfred, who was the commissioner of baseball. And that's what threw me for a loop, because I know for a fact, if you kind of lined things up and said, how many articles did Ken Rosenthal write pro Major League Baseball, pro Rob Manfred, even to the idea of some of these lunatic rules that Manfred comes up with, Ken Rosenthal kind of protected that and encouraged some of those rules. And then all of a sudden during the labor negotiations, Ken Rosenthal kind of says, Rob Manfred's a stick in the mud. He's kind of, sabotaging the game kind of thing. And then all of a sudden he's gone and he doesn't get renewed. And that's what I think kind of blew everybody away. It was, he was so protective of the game itself and what Rob Manfred was trying to do, and then one or two articles of negative maybe content against Rob Manfred, and all of a sudden he's not renewed. And that blew me away because there's never been a stronger advocate, whether you agree with him or not, of a guy for Major League Baseball other than Ken Rosenthal. I think, underlying everything that he's ever written, he has been pro Major League Baseball, and he was a positive influence, man. I mean, a lot of the stuff that he did on Fox, the bow ties and the charity, everything was a positive towards the game. That's why it kind of threw me for a loop to see him get racked the way he did, and it gives you an idea of the dictator type ship that Manfred's maybe trying to run the game with.
Yeah, I don't know if it's dictatorial, but I will say what you just said really kind of resonates, which is I think I mean, you mentioned already about the lockout and what you're allowed to say and what you're not to. And the Astros were very specific, and Major League Baseball is very specific. And a lot of times they don't want all these opinions circling, and they don't want the waters kind of muddied when this is really outside the realm. These negotiations are going to happen with lawyers and some of the players and, all that. So that makes sense not speaking. I work for a company. They tell us, I mean, for example, we're colorectal cancer screening company. We're not allowed to use like poop emojis, right? I mean, things like that. Like, I know it sounds funny, but
dang, what a loss.
I know, but it's very, because you're not making light of it. It's a strict, I don't know if it's strict, but like, what the rules are. But I think to your point, if you slant one way, if you're kind of like the vice president of, marketing, or you have a leadership role, and more often than not, you're sticking to the company line, and you're, as you said, it was more than sticking to the company line. He was actually progressing those ideas that maybe some of the players didn't believe in and some of the fans didn't believe in, to say, hey, look, this entity isn't this evil empire you think it is. This is the reasoning behind why they're doing what they're doing. These are some of the thoughts. Like, he was really foundationally explaining, and as you said, maybe on their side for a good reason. So then when you say, hey, like, hopefully, I mean, even on this podcast, we were joking about you're starting the new year with this fiery, Geoff Blum. I'm going to say, hey, look, I'm going to stick to the positivity. I'm going to worry about things I can control. Let's disagree about that, and let's challenge each other, and let's keep each other honest about, come on, you're being too damn positive, Tuttle. This is just, this ain't going the right way.
I'm going to break you down.
That's right. So, and that's fine, but I welcome that. And I just think if you've had, like you said, a history, judge my character by what I've done and what I've said over the timeline and over the length of time. And then when I tell you, hey, Blum, you're a stick in the mud, or I really believe that you guys are, steering the ship in the wrong direction, then that's okay. Let's have that conversation. And maybe they got offended because he said it publicly, and there's all these other things that can get involved in that discussion. But I just think what he said wasn't that egregious, in the sense that he didn't say that they're doing anything illegal. He didn't say that they're, this is their negotiation tactic. I've said it on this podcast. I mean, taking down the player's name, images, and likeness from MLB.com is really, it's like childish. That's what you do in like third grade. Like, you don't like this kid, so you just cross his face out on the class picture.
You draw a mustache.
Yeah, you're like,
weird goatee on.
Yeah, and it's like, hey, I wasn't, we don't like that kid, but we're not, So I just, it's frustrating to see that that's where we're going. And as I mentioned at the outset, we're talking about freedom of speech, these type of things. Maybe he got a letter that said, hey, Ken, you can't talk about this stuff, and he talked about it, and they just didn't renew him. But it's just not. It doesn't seem like it's the right action. Yeah.
And if Rob Manfred's if he's frustrated by what Ken Rosenthal has said, imagine what, does he read the other comments around the world? I mean, there's plenty of people outside of MLB Network that have just been absolutely railing on him.
Yeah.
And I think what we're trying to say, and to our point, is, shouldn't you encourage the conversation? That's something we started this podcast on, the idea of, even if you're listening to us and you hate us and you disagree with us, we're creating the conversation. We're not going to sit there and rebut, or, we're going to rebut, or we're going to try and have the conversation, but we're not going to discourage anybody. I think it's wrong to discourage anybody from having the idea that they can't voice their opinion, because I've had plenty of conversations, and obviously I'm passionate about the game. I'm passionate about my ideas. I'm lucky enough to have a microphone in front of me on a daily basis to be able to have those ideas. But, I've run into situations where I haven't gotten shut down on Twitter, but I've actually had some pretty good conversations on Twitter with Dodger fans, with Yankee fans, with, people around the league, where they have an argument. And as long as you're coming back and having the conversation in a civil manner, I think that you should encourage that and be able to have that, because, self-reflection is sometimes something that you can use to make yourself a better person. And I think it's shutting down those voices and only hearing what you want to hear doesn't make you a better person.
No, I mean, if you come into a discussion and you change your mind, I'm more likely to be like, hey, that guy's open-minded. I mean, most people come into a discussion and they just want to make you see their point. And if you don't see their point, then they walk away. I mean, they're not there to have a real discussion or change their mind. And I think that's an unfortunate place that we've gotten to. in society in general. I mean, things aren't black and white. Everything is nuanced. There's nuance to everything. The Antonio Brown issue that we saw this last weekend. I mean,
I wrote that down too. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's nuance to it. But we heard some stories that it was about money, and it always comes down to money, which is so funny because everyone's like, well, was it about his ankle? Was it about the coaching? No, it's money. He wanted his incentives paid up front. But that's nuanced, right? There's stuff in the middle. So I think people that hated what he did still don't like him. They weren't like, oh, I see his point. I mean, I just think we kind of
it proved a preconceived notion to a lot of people. I think is what it did. It just reinforced people's ideas, or it created a new one. But a lot of people who had those negative reactions already had that preconceived
exactly,
notion.
And that's where I'm saying we are all that way on most of these issues. So, like we said, and I think that's the nuance here is that like you have disagreed with Ken Rosenthal on some things that he's written before. And again, he works for MLB Network. I've listened to Rich Eisen on his podcast, and he works for the NFL Network. You're definitely going to have a slant. I mean, you have an Astros slant.
I'm going to be Astros.
Yeah, you played for 5 teams or whatever, Expos and Astros and Padres and Diamondbacks. You played for all these teams. You have an Astros slant now. You worked for them for 9 years. You should, and you're employed by them. And that's part of what you get paid to do, but I think people should understand that and know that. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a discussion with you, and that doesn't mean that you're I mean, you were a big critic of the Astros during the scandal. You were a big critic of the problem was that the Astros got singled out. And I think we've beat that horse, a million times. But the reason I bring it up is that, I think sometimes internally you can still be your own critic, but still have the opinion that, look, these aren't horrible people. There's other things that were involved. And I just think that there's nuance to everything, and we've gotten in this black and white world, and it doesn't bode well for Major League Baseball and or this negotiation with the Players Association and ownership when somebody within their little network speaks up or has an opinion that's contrary to what they believe, and boom, they're out. So, I mean, I hope that works for, all these guys are lawyers, but I hope it works out well for the Players Association. And, initially we were saying, hey, let's March 1st, we'll have this all wrapped up, and so everybody can go to spring training and get ready. And, now we'll wait and see. We're not 100% sure about that, I guess.
So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can get notified when we post new videos.